Kaplan had started the SAJ, and he, I guess, woke up one day and realized that he had 4 daughters and he'd never have a bar mitzvah.
Do you think that the fact that your father had 4 daughters is the cause of his promotion to the bar mitzvah idea?
No female had ever mounted the Bimah in all our history.
They asked me if I was the one who was the first bar mitzvah in the Kaplan that they read about. I say, no, that was my sister Judy, of course. So they said, well, which were you, the 4th bar mitzvah? I said, no, they were all the other people who came between us. It didn't go just the Kaplan girls weren't the only people who were bar mitzvah.
When I became of bat mitzvah age, there was absolutely no thought of my becoming a bat mitzvah. Nobody in my class was a bat mitzvah. All the boys were indeed bar mitzvah.
Now, I mean, these many years later, I read and I hear bar and bat mitzvah, bar and bat mitzvah. I mean, like it's been that way ever, since Sinai.
I did my first Haftorah here, so that had to have been in the 70s. And that was a very big deal for me, and it was an enormously emotional occasion for my mother because it wasn't usual.
I had a bat mitzvah in 1957, and my memory is that all the people at the Hebrew school, boys and girls, if you were a boy, you had a bar mitzvah. If you were a girl, you had a bat mitzvah. It seemed to be the norm. That's how I remember it. All of us in the class did it.
It was unusual among my peers for me to be having a bat mitzvah. None of my girlfriends from school, regular school, took Hebrew.
Women, girls had bat mitzvahs, and that's what happened. I didn't really realize how extraordinary that was until I got into the wider Jewish world and saw that it didn't happen very much. What came from the SAJ is that women do participate equally, certainly in conservative Judaism. I don't know that much about Reform, but it sounds that way too. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's a direct result of what started at the SAJ.
We were the first, actually, to give women complete freedom and equality in the ritual service.
We didn't take action at the SAJ on calling women up to the Torah until, I think, the late 50s.
Didn't come easily. At one meeting of the SAJ one year, the membership meeting, when it came up for a vote, it was defeated, chiefly by the women. Kaplan got up furious and said, you call this a society for the advancement of Judaism? I call it a society for the regression of Judaism.
Elise was the one of the few women who said, they don't approve of that. But it was her daughter who influenced her. It was an interesting story, which she told herself, that her daughter became bat mitzvah. And after the bat mitzvah, her daughter said, well, now is that it? That's the end? I was called to the Torah once and that's the rest of my life? And it finally dawned on her how inconsistent that was, and she removed her objection. And as long as the objections were removed, we went ahead. And then, from then on, it was all equality of women in every respect.
Did it feel like I was really becoming a member of the adult Jewish community as it signifies?
In fact, it wasn't any kind of special movement from one being into another being.
But it certainly was a passage. I mean, it really meant something. We talked about being on the Bimah, and I'm thinking, we were all on the Bimah all kinds of times for Purim plays, for all kinds of, as little kids, and that was, that we were familiar with that. But when you became bat mitzvah, you were on the Bimah and you were reading from the Torah, and I think that really did make a difference. I think that felt like something, excuse me, but awesome.
Not quite magical, but very powerful moment. And I do remember that clearly. And I do remember feeling a new certain power that I was able to come up for an aliyah and being aware of the difference of what I could now do.
My mother was Ina Solomon, and it was her mother, Blanche Ehrenstein, who, with her husband, Mo, came here in 1945.
My mother was a founder of the SAJ. Her name was Julia Sack. Was it the egalitarian nature that struck her in terms of her attraction to Reconstructionism? That might have been part of it. I don't think that was the major attraction. I think what the major attraction was a new way of looking at being Jewish, at Judaism, regarding ritual, of the focus on social action.
My mother was Doris Miller. She had some connection to the Jewish Center as a child, but when she came to the SAJ, she got more and more interested in what was going on, and she learned to read Hebrew, and she learned trope, and she never had an adult bat mitzvah, but she read the Haftorah, and I believe the first time she read the Haftorah was their 30th anniversary. That would be 1965. So I think 1965 was the first time, and she read Haftorah some number of times in the next 10 or 15 years after that.
Although my mother put me in a position of being a role model for her by sending me to a Jewish school and allowing me to be her teacher, she definitely was a role model for me as well, because she actually started wearing a talit regularly long before I did, a few years before I did, and it really paved the way for me to feel comfortable with that. Because of growing up dually at SAJ and at Ramaz, I was sort of uncomfortable with things that I thought of as male symbols. And it took me a while to figure, and what I've come up with for myself now is I will wear a talit, because I consider that to be, it is a commandment for Jewish people to wear a talit.
When I was growing up, women did not wear talitot. It just wasn't an issue. No one discussed it. And women, if there were ever an occasion where candles were being lit, women lit the candles, as is the tradition. Men never did that. So it wasn't that women and men were the same, or did exactly the same things, but in terms of Torah and coming up to the Bimah, they were equal.
When I had my bat mitzvah, it was the norm for women in modern Orthodox and even some Orthodox movements to have something called a bat mitzvah, whether it was just speaking at a Sunday morning service or simply having a party or a kiddush in her honor, having a father have an aliyah in the daughter's honor. It wasn't until several years later that I realized that had all started at my synagogue. And I was very proud when I discovered that. And then even later, realizing what a huge impact that had on all kinds of Jewish movements that consider themselves at all modern, even Orthodoxy and modern Orthodoxy, that it took a moment to celebrate the women and their Jewish education and their Jewish growth.
אשר בארץ מואב אשר על פני רחוב וראה את ארץ כנען אשר אני נותן לבני ישראל לאחוזה